30 seconds. 20 seconds. 10 seconds.
Hi,
My name's JC McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Good morning again. This is Jonathan Small, host and producer of All About You. All About You is one of two different programs that I have the pleasure of hosting and producing live every single week at AccessTV.org studio. All About You is a show that's designed to let you, the guests and viewers, know something about the particular guest's life story. This morning we have a returning guest to the AccessTV.org network who I had the pleasure of interviewing earlier during the year on the Face-to-Face Public Affairs talk show, and I'm looking forward to having him this morning on All About You biographical talk show. This guest has a tremendous background in the aviation industry. He has served the United States and the Vietnam War. He is one of the most highly sought after aviation analysts in America. He has written bestsellers books, I believe, and he brings a lot of different information about his life and background to the table. This morning, the guest is no other than ABC World News, Good Morning America aviation analyst, veteran commercial pilot, no other than John Nance. Good morning, John. How are you doing?
Just fine, Jonathan. Good to be with you again.
It's good to be with you again as well. John, I believe you were born and raised in Dallas, Texas.
That's correct. It seems a long time ago, and in many ways it is chronologically, but the path has led through the state of Washington as far as residency is concerned. I've been kind of a Washingtonian ever since.
Well, let's go back to your early childhood. What was it like for you as a child growing up in the city of Dallas?
I was very lucky. Two things. First of all, Dallas considered itself a part of Texas only by geographical accident at that particular time. So there wasn't a lot of heavy accent, Texas accents. There wasn't a lot of emphasis on anything other than business and the economy. And my dad was an attorney, so what I watched him as I grew up was the examples that he gave as a corporate lawyer and in a stable environment in Dallas, and I had just extraordinary parents, my mother and father both. I look back at the amount of freedom that I had to just get on my bike and go riding off 5 or 10 miles, no cell phones, nothing like that, and it seems pretty extraordinary. But no, it was a wonderful upbringing.
Texas is known for football in particular. I don't know if the Dallas Cowboys were established when you were growing up as a child, but
Yeah.
was there any particular sports that you had an interest in and participated in, either on or off the field?
Well, Dallas Cowboys were the thing, of course, in the '60s, and we called them the cardiac kids because they always seemed to pull it out in the fourth quarter in the last couple of minutes.
Hmm.
And Tom Landry was the coach, and Don Meredith was the quarterback. And those days seem ancient history, but it was quite an exciting time. I was kind of into a lot of different sports, and when I was in my last 2 years of high school, were in a prep school called St. Mark's School of Dallas, which is a wonderful place. And I keep quite well in touch with him ever since. I played football and ended up breaking my leg in four places trying to stop a tackle that I shouldn't have tried to stop. But other than that, beforehand, it had been football and soccer and just kind of dabbling in sports. Baseball too, I always loved.
Well, I believe when you was growing up in Dallas, the Cowboys played in Cotton Bowl Stadium, which technically is in Dallas. Did you ever get a chance to visit Cotton Bowl Stadium?
Yeah, I've been to many games in the Cotton Bowl Stadium, including one that was not the Cowboys. Matter of fact, it was SMU, which was my school, and they were opposing, I believe, Rice University. But it was a famous game because right in the middle of it, there was a fumble, and the opposing team picked up the ball and had 90 yards to run all the way to the end zone. And as he was running past the middle bench, somebody on the bench simply could not stand it, came off the bench and tackled him. Of course, it ended up being a chargeable touchdown, but it was a very strange circumstance. I've seen that tape out there, the film actually. That was a really cold day, but mostly the Cowboys did play in the Cotton Bowl until Texas Stadium, as it was called, was built in Irving, and then that became their home.
And did you ever get a chance to visit Texas Stadium as well in Irving,
Oh yeah,
Texas?
many times. Texas Stadium was one of those where they had the early version of the private boxes that could be incredibly elaborate in terms of the amount of money people spent on them. But it became a thing, and I think it probably was the leading example that then burned through the NFL. That if you're going to build a stadium, make sure you've got plenty of room for the millionaires' boxes.
Okay. Let's go back a little bit earlier in your childhood. I believe in 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. Do you have any
Yep.
memories of what that was like as a child when you heard that news story?
Oh, indelible memories. I was a senior at St. Mark's at that point in time. Dallas was largely a Republican city, Republican as it was at the time, and the basic idea was they didn't like Kennedy very much at all, and it was kind of incongruous that once the president got on the ground, everybody was cheering, and there was a party atmosphere, but there was a very not violent, but a dark undertone of political disagreement that then all of a sudden got shattered in everybody's faces when the president was assassinated. Yeah, I remember exactly where I was in the building, exactly what I was doing, and the next hours with indelible certainty. But I think that the one memory that is seared in my head is the memory of Air Force One taking off from Dallas Love Field with the body of the president and the new president, Lyndon Johnson, and flying a route that jetliners never flew out of Dallas Love Field because they came off from the north, or rather, I should say, they came off the runway and made a tight bank to the right and came out right over our campus. And I remember looking at that, knowing who was aboard, knowing what the situation was, and remembering clearly the stories of the train bearing Lincoln's body from I think the Washington D.C. all the way to Chicago, and the people who lined the tracks out of respect. It was just one of those things that not many people shared that vision, but I was standing in the parking lot at St. Mark's with that in my face.
Well, saying that you just stated that the country had like given Dallas a black eye towards the reputation at that particular point. This is long before television shows like Dallas and even the Cowboys became so worldwide popular. How did your perception for yourself felt about the city of Dallas? Did you change any perceptions or any thoughts about saying I don't want to live in Dallas? Did you take Kennedy being assassinated for you personally?
You pretty much take the viewpoint of your parents, and my parents were reasonably middle of the road conservatives, and they did not like the liberalism that they saw in the Kennedy camp, which was why they didn't particularly care for this president. There was never anything stated that was a violent potential. The idea that somebody would shoot him, it was simply anathema. But the fact is that there was an undercurrent, and it flew in the face of the fact that I was proud of my city. I mean, we had new skyscrapers going up. We had a commerce here and there. It was the type of place when somebody would come to visit from the East Coast, the family would get them in the car and drive them all around town to show the different progress that Dallas had made. Now suddenly we were the city that killed Kennedy, and it was very very difficult. There was a lot of local commentary on the time at the time on television, and most of it was very very dark. even somebody suggested they might as well close up the city and shut it down because it would never be an operable place again, which was a silly reference. But that the darkness of the reaction and the shame that came from it was as if we all had had a part in pulling that trigger, regardless of who was on the other side of the gun. And it was a psychological blow of very, very deep proportions that went on for many, many years.
Okay, so now, John, as you're entering high school and making a decision what you wanted to do with your life after high school, what was the determining factor for you to decide to go to SMU University, which is located in Dallas, Texas?
Well, there are a couple of aspects to this. First of all, I wanted to be a lawyer. Second of all, my dad had been Air Force. My uncles were all Air Force. And so there was no question that I was going to go into service at one point or another. And God forbid I should end up drafted. So I was going to make my own choice, and it was going to be Air Force. And with all that going on, I applied to Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth, Princeton, all of the East Coast schools. Didn't realize that they shared their lists with each other. And if they saw somebody pop up on too many university lists, in other words, having made application to them, they would not bring you in. So I ended up with a provisional acceptance to Princeton and the rejection from everybody else, and that was really a tough blow. And it was more or less a reaction that I decided, all right, fine, I'll just go find a fun school, and I can't think of anything better than the University of Hawaii. And I'd never been out there, but I got accepted immediately. SMU had accepted me, but I kind of blew past that, and ended up with my first year of college at the University of Hawaii in Honolulu, and that was a marvelous kind of coming of age time, if you will. But at the end of that year, I decided to come back to SMU because the University of Hawaii did not have at that time a law school, and they did at SMU. And so I settled into a curriculum that also was called a 3-3 plan, which meant that my senior year of undergraduate was my first year of law school if I got in, and I did.
So your take was you had nothing against Hawaii, you just didn't have the law school. So had you had the law school, you think you would have stayed in Honolulu, Hawaii, long term?
Yeah, life would have been quite different
Life.
because I probably would have never left, as they call it, the Rock. There was a lot of homesickness of that first year that was involved in pushing me on that decision,
Mm.
and there have been times since then that I wondered if I should regret it, if there's such a phrase, because as I say, things would have been quite different. I was just settling in, just getting to be a kind of a part of the community there as a college student when I uprooted myself and came back to SMU. But there were a lot of good things that came from coming back to SMU as well.
Now, for people who are unfamiliar with SMU, obviously they have a football team as well,
Mhm.
basketball team. Is there anybody that you went to college with that you think people would know offhand, like anybody that made it in professional sports or entertainment or business or government that you could think of?
Well, I'm sure there were a lot in my overall class at SMU, but the when you ask that question, what comes to mind is the people that I went to prep school with at St. Mark's.
Mm.
Tommy Lee Jones was in one class behind me. Boz Scaggs, Steve Miller from the Steve Miller Band, and we've had a number of people, including a lot of people who've become very financially successful over time. St. Mark's was a marvelous school, and that even though they're pre-university, they acted like a university, and their focal point was public service and basically learning the ins and outs of the society in order to be a contributing member. It was really quite a school, and still is quite a school.
Hmm. Well, John, for people who recognize you through the media as the aviation analyst, at some point you would have to learn how to become a pilot. You mentioned earlier that you have a family background in aviation. What age or what stage of your life did you started to learn how to become a pilot?
You know, I couldn't find exactly the earliest memory as a clear memory, but no airplane ever got past me unnoticed as a kid. I
Mm.
mean, that was always something that was kind of a given, was that eventually I would learn how to fly airplanes. In fact, I did get my private license at that year at pardon me, the year at Honolulu at the University of Hawaii. Pardon me. At the license was May 5th, 1965, and I flew around a little bit and rented airplanes for the next number of years until I realized that the instruction had been pretty shallow, and I scared myself a few times. And finally, knowing that I was going to go into the Air Force, decided that I was going to hang it up, stop flying until I had some professional instruction. That's probably saved my life about a dozen times over. But it was aviation was something that was just in my blood. I remember so clearly watching airplanes fly over Dallas Love Field, which was not far from our house. Braniff Airlines, for instance, big four-engine DC-7Cs, or even a Constellation every now and then. And I remember earlier, at age about 4 to 4.5, we lived in a place that was literally aligned with the main runway at Dallas Love Field. And I remember standing, or sitting, I should say, maybe on my slide at the back of the house facing south, watching B-36s and DC-7s and all sorts of wonderful hardware come over my head so close, it felt like so close that I could reach up and touch them.
Well, John, you mentioned Love Field in Dallas, but I believe you were still in Dallas when DFW Airport was built in 1974. Do you have any memories how that airport was laid out, designed, and built at that particular stage?
Well, we were watching it, of course. I knew every inch of Dallas Love Field, but I had left for college at that time and then had come back. My entry into the Air Force started with Class 7108,
Mm-hmm.
which meant that I was already in Arizona and learning to fly airplanes the Air Force way by June of 1970. So the airport was finished after that, and I bit by bit got to know it. It was kind of a blow to see Dallas Love Field almost abandoned at that point, because, as I say, I had known that airport so well, practically every door and every corridor of it.
Mm-hmm. When did you get drafted into the Vietnam War, John?
Well, as I say, that was one thing that I never wanted to have happen. I had certainly a 2S deferment, but I was in college, and I knew that the moment I got my degree, I would be drafted if I didn't go in. So I joined the Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC. One of the smartest decisions I ever made. And I made it for a frivolous reason, because I was in the ROTC for that year at the University of Hawaii, but it wasn't very inspiring. It was very pedantic. And I got to SMU, and I wasn't going to enroll there. But my new roommate, Jim Rice, enrolled in the detachment and came back with his crisp uniform and was hanging on the back of the door in our dorm room. And I took a look at that and decided, yeah, okay, I'm going to go ahead and sign up. And I'm sure glad I did. It led to a lifelong, association with the Air Force, and I'm still I still retain my commission as a lieutenant colonel.
But overall, what was it like for you participating in a war? I mean, did you have any doubts about, is this where you really needed to be at? I mean, you've heard issues of Muhammad Ali refusing to be drafted or go into or be enlisted into the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
That Vietnam War caused a lot of controversy at that time, a lot of protests. So, how did you take participating in a type of war like the Vietnam War overall?
Well, when you have a particular point of view that, as I said earlier, is colored by your parents and by the people you love, you tend to look down that same tube. And I remember seeing President Nixon on the air many times and feeling like the criticism against him and against the war was all bogus. I was never a part of, never exposed to the type of anti-war sentiment that burned through so many college campuses, not just on the West Coast. I understood the turmoil, but I didn't understand why. And even when I was in the middle of it in the Air Force, as a C-141 pilot, there tended to be kind of a blind acceptance among all of us. In other words, if the president said it, that's the way it was. And of course, you come out of that bit by bit over time, and then look back, in my case, at those days in Vietnam, going in and out, 70, 71, 72, or actually 71, 72, 73. And it's hard to reconcile. Pardon me. The fact that there was so much legitimate political turmoil about the aims of the war and the accomplishments or lack of same, and yet we weren't seeing that. It was right in front of us, but we weren't seeing that. That was not the same situation for the folks who were on the ground and getting shot at. We really never got shot at in the C-141. We flew them in, we flew them out, we flew a lot of broken bodies out, but the Viet Cong never really fired at us. We used to joke it was because they got about half of what we brought in. After the war, we found tunnels north of Tan Son Nhut Air Base in Saigon, and actually they did get about half of what we flew in.
So part of your job as a pilot in the Vietnam War, you were not asked to bomb any particular countries or bomb any particular people. You were just to fly
No,
in and do your services on that level.
that's right. I
Okay.
was a transport pilot for the Military Airlift Command, and MAC, as we called it. It's now called AMC. But we were the people who brought the transports in and out, both C-5s and C-141s. And also there was the command based in Scott Air Force Base in Illinois that controlled the charter airplanes, and there were thousands of them chartered over time. Big airliners like DC-8s bringing people in and out and shift changes essentially for the war. But all of this going on, it seemed to be impossible to reconcile how such a supposedly ragged force of people out of North Vietnam could hold the greatest air force and army of the world in place. But I was never one of the ones who was firing the guns. In other words, when I got out of Air Force pilot training, I came out number one in my class, and it was traditional for us at that time that they put a bunch of assignments in front of you. If you had 70 people in the class, there were 70 assignments, aerial assignments, flying different airplanes, and the first guy had his pick. Well, I had my pick, and I had long said that I wanted to fly big airplanes because I was actually a better instrument pilot than I was what we call a contact pilot, somebody who could bank and yank around and fly a fighter. Oh, yeah, I could fly a fighter, but I turned down 9 F-4s to take my C-141, and I thought they were going to send me to the base psychiatrist because their idea was everybody wants a fighter. Why would you turn that down?
Mhm. Well, John, was it an easy transition for you when you left the Vietnam War to go into the commercial airline industry and become a commercial pilot? Was that a different type of flying level of experiences for you just to make that adjustment from what you were recently doing as a veteran pilot?
I think a lot of us in the Military Airlift Command, knowing the war was winding down, and in my case, getting ready to transition to the reserves, which we had a detachment on my base at McCord Air Force Base in Tacoma, Washington. So I was able to go down the street, if you will, and hang up my hat in the Air Force Reserve. At that time, for anybody in my position, we had been thinking inevitably, all of us as pilots were thinking of the airlines, and the majority of us expected to go into the airlines. It took me about 9 months from the time I was released from active duty to the time that I finally got hired by Braniff International on December 5th of 1975. But that was something we had contemplated, and partially because of the schedule in my case. The idea that I could work 12, 13, 14 days a month intensively as a pilot and still have all this extra time to spend with my family and to do other things that I wanted to do. And the industry did not disappoint in terms of that situation, the situation of being able to control your schedule. It's a very unique situation for pilots and for flight attendants, and it's pretty universal. We can get an awful lot of time off the way we want it. We work hard, but we work hard on a very predictable basis in terms of the number of days out there, and whether you're international flying or national. At any rate, no, it wasn't difficult for me at all. I'd been thinking about it for some time, and the difficult proposition was gambling that not taking any other jobs of significance in gambling, that you were going to get that call from the airlines. Back then, there were so many people wanting to be airline pilots that most airlines had a standing list of at least 5,000 applications. That's not true today.
Well, John, did you have the desire to want to work for some of the major airlines that was really popular during that time, like Eastern Airlines, Pan Am, Delta, of course, is still big, and American and United? Did it really matter what particular airline that you were able to work for?
Well, it did. Pan Am was the creme de la creme in our thinking at that time. And I don't mean that as a royal we, but I think the majority of pilots really looked up to Pan American. And we didn't realize how troubled they were as an airline, and how many of their captains were unrepentant and unrecalcitrant in being the iron willed commander who tells everybody what to do. In other words, the commander is God and everybody else follows. That, we found out later, was killing a lot of people over time. But Pan Am was the creme de la creme, and right below that for me was Braniff International, because it was an exciting airline. It was a Dallas airline. They were the ones that came up with the so-called "End of the Plane" campaign, in which they painted the airliners in Easter egg colors, and had these fascinating costumes that they put the flight attendants in. And it was an airline that was setting the pace for the entire industry in so many ways, except safety. And safety was allowed to lapse a little bit because there were a lot of things we did not know at the time that we did later on. So, to answer your question directly, Pan Am was probably not reachable for me. There were too many people wanting in. Braniff, I figured, was, because it was my hometown airline, and I had some family contacts that I pulled hard on those strings, and unashamedly, and finally succeeded in getting on.
So you were still living in the Dallas metro area at that particular time when you started to become a commercial
Let's
pilot?
see. In that particular, yeah, 1975, I had actually settled in Tacoma, Washington,
Mm.
but I was spending certain amount of time in Texas, and still had family in Dallas. But those days were a little bit hairy, because I was also trying to take jobs of one sort or another, selling advertising at one point. I remember it took me all the way up to Anchorage to try to keep the family afloat while we were waiting for this hoped for airline job. It was a bit of a gamble. Because you couldn't in good conscience take a professional position. I was also a lawyer at that time, and licensed in Texas, but you could not hook up with a company in good conscience, and knowing that the moment the airline called that you had an application into, you would leave the situation, whatever it was, leave that company and run right to the airlines. And then that's exactly what I wanted to do. So I basically pedaled as hard as I could to keep us afloat, succeeded in that, and unfortunately Braniff called on December 5th of 1975. I had already been approached by Federal Express as to getting what we call a type rating in the jet that they were using at the time, which was called a Fanjet Falcon. It was a small airplane. They were just at the very beginnings of what would later become a worldwide corporation. But FedEx called me 2 weeks after Braniff called, and I turned him down politely because I didn't want to fly boxes. I wanted to fly people.
Right, right. John, as a veteran pilot, has there been any scary moments that you had experienced during your aviation career that you would like to share with people?
Oh, wow. I do get that question every now and then. It's a very legitimate one, and you go back to the old statement that commercial flying is hours and hours of boredom punctuated by moments of stark terror.
Hmm.
But we hardly have any moments of stark terror anymore, because we've learned how to be very safe, and we've learned what it takes to do that. But in my case, I think probably the scariest moment was with Braniff. I was a second officer. That's how you started out as a pilot. You went into the backseat, the engineer's position on a Boeing 727. And then when you were able to get promoted, mainly by seniority list, you went to the right seat as a co-pilot, and then to the left seat as a captain. So we were flying in a 727. and we were going into Denver from Dallas. And it was a situation where I had a young captain who I had met before, a fellow by the name of Pete Koberg, sitting in the left seat. And Pete was either blessed or cursed with a baby face. I mean, the guy was in his mid 20s, and he looked like he was 16 or maybe even less than that, to the point where the company had asked him to please stop standing in the doorway to greet the passengers because he was scaring them.
Hmm.
Uh, he was a good captain. Excuse me just a second. He was a good captain in every other respect, but he was flying in a traditional situation in which the captain, as I say, was God and everybody else followed. And so the idea that you would have a collaborative environment in that cockpit was rather unusual. And we were about, maybe 10 minutes away from descent into Denver when we got word that there had been a thunderstorm that had moved across the city from the west to the east, which was unusual. And the co-pilot, I can't remember his name now, and myself were both military guys, and Pete was not. He had not come in through that door. And he turned to us at one point and says, "Guys, I know you both as Air Force uh, have had a lot of exposure to weather situations, and maybe to Denver too. But he says, we got this report up here," and he says, "What do you think we ought to do?" And I remember thinking, wait a minute, the captain is asking us what to do. Usually we have to scheme and figure out other ways of getting the captain to understand that there's an alternative method. Because most of the attitudes of the senior captains, especially, was when I want your advice, I'll ask for it. And here he is asking. So we had a discussion for about 5 minutes, and it was very fruitful. And what we came down to was the idea that, okay, we're going to be landing from the west to the east on a fairly short runway at 5,000 feet, which is 1 mile above sea level, and the runway is going to be wet. But we have a very high possibility of a thing called a microburst, which is a sudden downburst of wind that can end up in a situation where you're flying into it. You gain a certain number of knots, go right across the middle of it. Now you lose those knots and the equivalent on the other side. So let's say it's a 40 knot effect. So you lose 80 knots by the time you go through that. That may be enough to throw you out of the sky or to let you drop literally and become non aerodynamic. So we talked about it and decided to carry an extra 60 knots, 60 knots of airspeed. Now, that's quite a decision in terms of a high altitude airport with a wet runway. But if we hadn't done it, to make a long story somewhat shorter, we ran through one of those microbursts right off the end of the runway, and we lost about 65 knots of airspeed. If we had not been carrying that extra speed, we would have ended up crashing, literally crashing onto Quebec Avenue, which bordered the airport on the western side. And even as that was, even with the extra airspeed, we still hit very hard. So hard I had to call an inspection of the aircraft when we got into the gate. That was those few moments when you realize if we hadn't carried this airspeed, we'd be dead now. Was pretty profound.
Well, I think there was a crash in Dallas, actually, since we're talking about your hometown at DFW Airport. I think there was some type of windstorm, what you just mentioned, in 1985 as an aviation analyst. Do you remember that flight?
It,
Exactly what
I,
happened during that particular stage in 85? I think it was August 85.
August 85. I'm not sure whether you're talking about the Boeing 727, pardon me, that
Mm.
crashed on takeoff, or about a Delta Lockheed 1011, which hit a microburst in coming into the airport in a thunderstorm.
It
I
was the
can't remember
Delta.
which
No, actually, it was the Delta flight that was landing in Dallas.
was
That
landing. Okay,
okay.
that was a Lockheed 1011 with
Mm,
Delta.
mm.
They basically did exactly what we did, but without the extra airspeed. They flew into a microburst, did not realize it, and by that time they had too little airspeed. They ended up hitting a couple of cars on the roadway leading to the airport and crashing onto the runway and tumbling. And there a few people got out of it, but a lot of them didn't. I can't remember the death toll now, but it was one of the preeminent accidents that changed our thinking in terms of the way we had to deal with microbursts and with thunderstorm activity at an airport. And this is when GPS was just coming into effect too, the ground proximity, not ground, pardon me, the global positioning satellite system, and that became our our ability to make sure we never had any more of these accidents, because then you could take a look on approach and see precisely what your speed was over the ground. And as long as you made sure that your ground speed was equal to a flying speed that would work, then you were okay. So if you flew that ground speed, it would get you out of anything as long as you were aware of this particular type of situation. Before that, we did not know that, for instance, we were bucking maybe a sudden 40 knot increase in speed. You'd see a little bit of a change on the airspeed, but then suddenly when it dropped out on the other side, you wouldn't have any warning. So this became the methodology that has been used and is used continuously now throughout aviation, and that's why we don't have those accidents anymore.
Well, John, obviously you're one of the most sought after aviation analysts in the country, and you made the transition to, I guess, retire as a commercial pilot. And then how did you become an aviation analyst for ABC World News and Good Morning America?
Well, I worked my way through college in Dallas as a broadcaster.
Hmm.
So while I was enrolled in both SMU and SMU Law School, I was also doing radio news for a company, a station called WFAA. It, pardon me. It becomes interesting to people at times to say, well, then that must have been you were with the FAA. No, I was with a station called WFAA. And during that period of time, I picked up enough professionalism, fortunately, because it was a big station, that later on, when I came out of the Air Force and joined the airlines and so on, and started writing books, which my first one was 1982. I knew what to do if somebody put a microphone in my face. And in 1984, I started working on a book called Blind Trust, which was about the deleterious effects of airline deregulation, and basically throwing away most of the rules and saying, you all come in. And you know, you can be an airline leader without knowing anything about aviation. Well, it was having a disastrous effect. When people started reading that book, which came out in '86, called Blind Trust, I got a lot of interviews, which is just normal with a major book. But because I had the broadcast experience, suddenly I became the go-to guy to ask questions of, in terms of what does this mean, how does this particular problem affect aviation safety, etc. And so there was a history there that when we got into the period of about 1988 and 89, I was on the air quite a bit. And it was an informal status. I was not paid for this, but it was enjoyable because I thought I was doing something good. And I think to this day that I was. But it was about 4 years, almost 5 years later, that there was a terrible crash in a U.S. air accident in Pittsburgh. It's a U.S. Air 427, and the ABC network called me up, and I've been doing a lot for them, but not exclusively. They called me up and said, "We'd like to have you come on board exclusively on this particular accident." And I thought about it a while, and finally decided, okay, I would try it out for a year. Matter of fact, I happened to know Larry King at the time, and I got an opportunity to ask Larry in person, what should I do? Because you know, if I take this position, I can't do your show anymore. And he called me quite a few times as accidents occurred and the reporting was necessary. So it became a matter of the ABC network realizing that they were utilizing me and they wanted the expertise on an exclusive basis. Fortunately, Larry basically said, "Don't worry about it. I've got enough horsepower. I'll make sure that anytime I want you on the air, they'll let you go." And he was true to his word on that.
Hmm.
So at about 1994, I joined ABC formally as the aviation analyst. Now, this was not a full-time position. This is kind of a consultant position, and that's the way it's been for over 30 years now. Because we're owned by Disney, I always joke that I work for the mouse, but it's been a wonderful relationship.
Right. So if anybody want to see you after a particular aviation incident, they could always catch you on ABC World News, Good Morning America. As we're getting close to ending this particular segment, are there any other things that you're currently doing or involved with that you would like for people to know about?
Well, I think one of the things that people do not really know about outside a particular arena is what I've been doing in medicine for the same 30 years. A very wise doctor contacted me after my writing of Blind Trust, which again was about airline deregulation and safety. Had a great amount about human factors and human performance. And what was happening in the 80s, which I wrote about, was that we finally came to the realization that accidents are going to occur if you have the attitude that people can be perfect. In other words, we can train for perfection. We can try our best to get to so-called zero defects. But the fact is that human beings are human beings, and we're always going to make mistakes. So the changeover in aviation safety had to be to say, all right, we're going to work hard to minimize the number of mistakes, but we're going to recognize that we're still going to make mistakes regardless of how hard we try. So we have to build a system over here to safely absorb the mistakes that we can not completely eliminate. That was seismic in terms of the revolutionary aspect of looking at it. And it began to have a great effect. But I got a call from this doctor by the name of Eric Knox late one night in probably about 86, 87. And he's reading my book, Blind Trust. And he said, you got to come talk to my people. And I said, Doc, I don't know anything about medicine. I have no idea what I would say. He said, all I want you to do is come talk to my people because he's the head of the medical head of a major hospital insurance company. And he said, they need to know what you're going through because you're 20 to 30 years ahead of where we need to be in medicine. In other words, we were just understanding and beginning to incorporate this principle of understanding human failure and human factors. And medicine was still back in the days of the surgeon is God and everybody follows and nobody will talk to you as a surgeon because they're afraid of you, et cetera, et cetera. So, pardon this cold.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what came about from that is 30 years of involvement of talking to doctors and nurses and hospitals and consulting and being very deep into the medical community and even writing a book that has been incredibly successful called Why Hospitals Should Fly. And all of that seems to be a complete separate situation from aviation, but the reality is that what we uncorked in aviation safety in terms of how to approach things and how to make things safe is seismic and it has direct impact to almost every other human endeavor because we have all had this idea, including corporations, that we could finally get people to not make mistakes, we wouldn't have any problems. That's never going to happen. And of course, when you look at something as critical as the air traffic control system, you begin to realize how critical it is that you understand this, that people cannot be 100% perfect 100% of the time. So you always have to build a system around it to absorb the mistakes that we can't otherwise cancel out.
Well, John, usually I would ask this question basically when I'm ending the show, but you kind of had, I guess I kind of already asked you the question. If there was any last things that you would like for people to know about your life, and I'll still ask you this question again, but I always try to end the show somewhat on a positive, optimistic viewpoint, and you just laid out a real interesting viewpoint towards accidents and safety. But again, John, as we're ending this particular segment, if there's any last things about your life in particular or anything that you are doing that you would like for people to know about briefly, feel free to express yourself.
Well, I appreciate that. I guess it gets down to the question of what do you do now?
Mm-hmm.
I have more books I want to write. I certainly am still very much enjoying the association with the ABC network and Good Morning America and World News. And we've got quite a team, in fact. But at the same time, we're also lowering the number of times that I've got to come on the air because we're not having as many accidents, which is wonderful. And I guess overall, when people look at the chronology of it, and unfortunately, by this day and time, anybody in the public eye, you can find out what your birth date is easily. I feel like I'm about 36. The chronology disputes that, but by the same token, I don't want to I don't want to be thought of as an aging individual from publishing or from aviation or from anything else. I just want to keep on doing what I'm doing. And it's not a matter of refusing to retire or a matter of wanting to drop in your tracks. It's just a matter of, hey, I'm having fun and I'm learning things. So let's keep on going.
Well, John, keep up the good work. Obviously, I do tune in. Unfortunately, when there's an aviation accident or incident on ABC World News, Good Morning America, I believe you're one of the best as an aviation analyst. It was highly
Thank you.
interested to have you as a guest this morning on the All About You talk show, and look forward for you continuing to see you at some point on television and other areas that you are specializing in as well.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Appreciate the opportunity.
You're welcome, John. My pleasure as well. Okay, this is Jonathan Small. Just enjoyed hosting this edition of the All About You biographical talk show with with the special guest. He is an ABC World News Good Morning America aviation analyst, veteran commercial pilot, no other than John Nance. And I was able to learn some different things about his life. And I think for you, the viewers, obviously just watching him on ABC World News, you were also able to find out some different things about his life, and it was quite interesting and learning all in one. We'll be back here in a couple of weeks. We have to work on a particular show, but as I say every single week to your viewers out there, have a very blessed day and keep the faith. Thank you.